Okay, now the meeting is recording. The time is 6:31 p.m. And the chair has called the meeting to order. So as I was mentioning, if folks want to listen to this meeting in Spanish, they can call the number 1-877-568-4106. And the number to enter after you call that number is 877-394-869#. And Anna, could you just provide that in Spanish, please?
Muy buenas tardes. Queremos avisarles de que vamos a tener interpretación en español. Para acceder a esta va a tener que llamar al número 1877-568-4106 y va a marcar el número de identificación 877-394-869. Así que, por favor, para escuchar la interpretación en español, puede marcar ese número. Gracias. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Anna. So I'll take the roll call now. Councilmember Juan Carlos Parada.
Present.
Thank you. Councilmember Beatriz Cerrillo.
Present.
Thank you. Councilmember Linda Lopez is absent. Councilmember Blair Whitney.
Here.
Perfect, thank you. Councilmember Jennifer Ruiz.
Here.
Thank you. Councilmember Joni Gillespie is absent. Councilmember Everardo Rodriguez.
Present.
Thank you. And Youth Commissioner Gabriela Eke is absent, and our alternate youth councilmember Corinne Seta is also absent. And then finally, Chair Brooks Esser.
Present.
Thank you. And we have a quorum. Please proceed.
Thank you very much, Suki. Next on the agenda is public comment. Anyone may speak up to 2 minutes on any topic not on the agenda, keeping in mind that the council cannot discuss or take actions on items not on the agenda tonight. Do we have any public comment?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As the chair pointed out, this is for non-agenda items. So if you wish to speak, please do click a raise hand feature now. Okay, I don't see any hands raised, so back to you, Chair.
Let's see, could we check on the attendees? I believe Raphael has his hand up.
Oh, great. Thank you. I just saw that. Yeah.
Oh, no problem.
Mr. Raphael, I'm going to give you the permission to talk and you'll have 2 minutes. Please proceed.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Yes.
Great. Thank you, Chair Esser, and I would just like to thank you all. I'm speaking as the Executive Director of Redwood City Together currently. I will be speaking later as a participant of the study, but today, right now, it's about Redwood City Together. I want to thank the council for being engaged in our most recent United Against Hate Week of downtown Redwood City. Council members helped plan a really beautiful week with the library and also creating trainings. I want to give a special shout out to Councilmember Ed Rodriguez for helping us plan this wonderful event that we were able to engage upwards to around 500 community members. And it was really beautiful. And I just wanted to let you all know that we really appreciate the support you're all giving for Redwood City Together. And currently, we're also planning to partner more closely with the North Fair Oaks Library. So look forward to working closely with Chair Esser on that, being that I know that you have a close connection with the library. So I just want to give acknowledgement to you all for supporting our mission. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Raphael. Okay, at this time, I'll make last call for folks to raise their hand if they wish to speak on non-agenda item. Okay, I don't see any other hands raised, Chair, so back to you.
Very good. Thank you, Suki. Next item on the agenda is a community workshop, really the focus of our meeting this evening. We're going to be discussing a plan to meet the county's housing needs over the next 8 years as part of the update of the housing element of the county general plan. And to do that, we'll begin with a presentation from Will Gibson of County Planning and Building. Will, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair Esser. Thank you, council members, for having me here. As you said, this is intended to give a brief overview of the county's housing elements and the housing element update process. We were before you in September, and I do apologize for any participants, the council and the public who were here in September. This is largely a recap. Our hope was we could do a little bit more robust outreach this time around and get more participants, but of course, facing the holidays upcoming, that was a challenge as well. So I'm not sure if we achieved that, but I just intend to go ahead with the presentation as planned, and maybe we can do some work to promote the recording of this event out to the public as well, to give people a chance. And we will, of course, be coming back for some more detailed study sessions over the next few months as well. So there will be other opportunities. So with that said, let me just share my screen really quickly here. Okay, and you should be seeing the presentation now. So as I said, this is an overview and a recap for some of you of the county's housing element, what the housing element is, what its purpose and content is, and the process of updating it. And I'm going to walk through just in general, what is the housing element, what are the components of the housing element, the update process and the timeline, opportunities for outreach and participation, some additional sources of information, and then take questions on the presentation. And then I believe, guided by the chair, and then I believe that the council will open it up for public discussion as well following that. So what is the county's housing element? The housing element is a plan for the housing that is needed in a jurisdiction or a community. It is part of the county's general plan, which is a plan for land use and development policies for the unincorporated county as a whole. It's required by state law, and it assesses our current housing needs and our future housing needs over the next 8 years. And it includes housing policies and housing programs specifically to meet those needs. It must be updated every 8 years, and that update schedule is by region. So all Bay Area jurisdictions in the 9-county Bay Area are on the same schedule. All of them are updating their housing element currently. And importantly, the county housing element is for the unincorporated county only. So each city separately has its own housing element, and they are all, while we are working together on components of shared work, they are all independently updating their housing elements as well. And so the components of the housing element can vary, but the most fundamental required components are an analysis of housing conditions and housing needs, an evaluation of the constraints to housing production, and those can take many forms: regulatory constraints, environmental constraints, others that keep housing from being produced. Importantly, an identification of available sites for housing production to meet our needs. And this is the sites inventory component of the housing element, which is essentially, along with policies and programs, the crux of the housing element itself. And it must show that we can meet what's called a regional housing needs allocation, which, or RHNA, which I will talk about in a few moments. And it must have a housing plan with goals, with specific policies and programs, and with quantified objectives to meet the housing needs, both that the regional housing needs allocation shows that we have, and our assessment of housing need demonstrates that we have to meet. So just turning to those components in order. So housing conditions and needs, we in general assess demographic and economic conditions in the community, population change, where and how are residents living, what types of housing, what are their housing conditions, what are the types of housing units in the community, single family, multifamily, are they for sale, are they rentals, what types of households and the sizes of households, income levels, poverty rates, housing costs, essentially everything that goes into determining what is the housing, the community experiencing in terms of its housing conditions, and what are the needs. And then of course, community input on what residents feel are their issues, their needs, and their housing goals. So, as we saw back in September, I showed some examples and showing them here again of how that can be demonstrated in the housing element. This is population growth between 1990 and 2020 for the Bay Area, for San Mateo County as a whole, including the cities, and for the unincorporated county. You can see they all track, and growth has been fairly significant over those last decades. Unemployment rates here. Similarly, there's a large increase in 2020, obviously owing to the pandemic, but these are the employment rates since 2010 to 2020. Household income levels by household type, and this is interesting because it shows that obviously owner households tend to have far greater incomes than rental households across all income categories. And then housing unit types and how those have changed from 2010 to 2020. So these are the kinds of assessments that we make in the housing element, and these tend to be how we demonstrate them to show what the housing conditions and the housing needs are. Turning to constraints to housing production. So the housing element must address the whole range of possible constraints that keeps housing from being produced. And those can be regulatory constraints, including zoning, including the time and complication it takes to process permits for new housing development. It could be the permitting and other fees that are applicable to housing. It could be design standards that are difficult to meet, or a range of other regulatory factors. It could be environmental factors such as sensitive habitats, flood zones, earthquake zones, or other factors that make housing difficult to be produced on particular sites or in particular areas. It could be the lack of infrastructure, including the availability of water or sewer, roads, and other factors that do not allow housing to be produced in certain areas or limit the amount or type in certain areas, and a whole range of other constraints that possibly could prevent or limit the amount of housing that can be built. And the housing element must assess all these, and then we must, to the extent possible, address how we can reduce these constraints. And then the crux of arguably the crux of the housing element, along with the policies and programs, is the sites inventory. And that is an inventory of developable sites that can be built on, or redevelopable sites that might be built on at greater densities than they currently are for housing production. And we must show that we have a sufficient amount to meet what's called the county's regional housing needs allocation, or RHNA, RHNA. And the RHNA is essentially the amount of housing that we need as an unincorporated county over the next 8 years, as determined by the state and by the Association of Bay Area Governments, or ABAG. And ABAG is the regional agency that is tasked with allocating our share by jurisdiction of this housing need. So what happens is the state determines the Bay Area's share of the statewide housing need over the next 8 years. They look at population trends, they look at trends in housing development, they look at where people are living, where they think jobs will be created, and a variety of factors, and then they allocate the need to the jurisdictions. ABAG takes that regional share and it splits it across Bay Area jurisdictions. Every city and every county has a share, and our portion of that is the county's RHNA. And the housing element must identify those sites to show that we have enough to meet the RHNA. So again, the RHNA methodology follows state law, but it's developed by ABAG. They make projections for the cities and counties. And the current RHNA, ABAG's methodology, assumes that most growth in the unincorporated county will happen and is happening in urbanized areas, significantly including North Fair Oaks. A large portion of our current RHNA is actually based on an assumption of growth by ABAG in the North Fair Oaks community, as well as several other unincorporated urbanized communities. And this assumption drives our share of the RHNA, but that does not mandate that we adopt specific growth policies. We do have to show we can meet the RHNA. We don't have to show we can meet it one-to-one in the way that that ABAG has made assumptions about where growth is happening. So just turning to show what the RHNA looks like. This is our allocation for the current housing element cycle, which is 2014 to 2022. And you can see the RHNA, it's called RHNA 5. The allocation is in the RHNA 5 column, and it's 913 units that we needed to demonstrate we had enough sites, developable sites, to meet that number. And they are broken down by income category: very low income, moderate income, and above. And this number, which I also demonstrated back in September when we came before the council, units built to date in the next column, we had about, as of the middle of this year, middle of 2021, we had achieved about 551 of those 913 units. So we're about 362 short. But with the units that have been built or are in the pipeline since then, and that will potentially be built before the end of this housing element cycle, we actually are going to we'll either be very close or we will surpass that number, at least in total, although maybe not by income category. So we are coming very close to that. We have had quite a bit of production, especially across the last 2 years. However, as you can see here, our new RHNA for the RHNA 6 from 2022 to 2030 is far, far higher. So we had the 913 number from the last cycle. What we are now at, the state and ABAG project our need for the unincorporated county at 2,833 units. So approximately 3 times where we were in the last cycle. And you can see, particularly in the lower income categories, the very low income category jumps from 153 to 811. The low income category jumps from 103 to 468. So the numbers have significantly increased. And this is true not only for us, it's true for every jurisdiction in the Bay Area, and it's true for almost every jurisdiction in the state. So we all face the same challenge. The state and ABAG are projecting that our housing need is far, far greater than it was in the last cycle. Which presents us with some real challenges in identifying enough developable properties that we can actually demonstrate we meet that number. Which brings us to the sites inventory. So this is the exercise by which we show that we do have that much developable land to meet the number. And the sites inventory assesses the sites available for housing. It can be vacant sites. It can be sites that might be redevelopable. And we must demonstrate that they're feasibly developable in a reasonable time frame. It has to look at all the constraints on the site, what might keep it from being built, what might lead to it being built. Are there market conditions that are favorable for housing construction on those sites? Are there sites that have been developed in the same area that might indicate that these may be built, and whatever other factors that might play into determining whether it is truly a realistic assumption that we have sites that can be built to meet that top line number. If there are not enough sites to meet the RHNA, we have to commit to creating more sites. And what that really means in almost every case is rezoning land, either non-residential land to residential, or existing residential properties to denser, taller, larger residential development. And again, we don't know whether we're going to be in that situation yet. We're working on the sites inventory now. We hope to have a draft of it by January, but that will show us whether we have to commit to rezoning or not. And if we don't have the sites and we do commit to rezoning, in general, we have to do it within 2 years. So the state does determine how quickly we have to go forward with that process. So we will be on a very short timeline to proceed with a zoning exercise to change some of the sites to make them developable. So, and what that looks like in the housing element, it can vary obviously, but we do have to demonstrate maps that show where the sites are specifically, so the public and developers and the state can see where they are. And we have to inventory them in a list that shows the nature of the site and the development assumptions. And our current housing element, it looks like this. More detailed analysis is actually required for the new housing element, so it will be a little more intricate than this. But again, the public will be able to see on a site-by-site basis what the assumptions are, where the sites are, and we'll be able to comment on whether they think those sites are actually appropriate for inclusion in the housing element. So that takes us through the sites inventory. Just turning to housing element goals, policies, and programs. So the housing element has overarching goals, which structure then the policies, the specific policies and programs to address housing needs. In our current housing element, they look generally like this, incentivize and facilitate housing affordable for residents at all income levels, allowing residents to live near their work, ensuring that housing is safe and habitable, obviously meeting our mandated RHNA target, which is a required goal, furthering fair housing, so economic, racial, gender, and all other segments of the community have equal chance to obtain housing, and responding to the community's expressed housing needs and goals. And this is just a selection, but in general, this is the type of overarching goal that our housing element contains now. So, and then of course, the housing element must have specific actions intended to address our housing needs with objectives and targets and quantified objectives. So for example, our current housing element, these are some of the programs that were included. A housing impact fee, which assesses fees on new development in order to fund additional housing. And our board did ultimately adopt that fee, so that policy was completed. Updates to our accessory dwelling unit regulations to facilitate the creation of ADUs. And with some help and urging from the state, we did update our regulations on several occasions in order to do so. So we have facilitated ADUs, and in fact, ADU production has increased dramatically over the last several years. We committed to adopting mobile home park protections so that mobile home residents would be protected from displacement. And our Board of Supervisors adopted a very comprehensive set of regulations to that end. And we committed to expanding apartment health and safety inspections, and we did achieve that. Our environmental health division is undertaking a far more robust program to provide health and safety inspections to multifamily residential units. And of course, the housing element also committed us to completing the multiple rezoning phases that were intended to implement the North Forks Community Plan, and those were achieved over the last several years as well. So those are just examples. There are some in our current housing element, there are some 50 plus programs and policies. We actually hope to streamline and reduce that significantly by consolidating and by removing ones that are no longer relevant. But this is just a sampling of the kind of programs and policies that can be included that will guide our work over the next 8 years. And so as we go forward to amend and to draft new housing policies and programs, we're going to be looking at how have housing needs changed, how have other conditions changed, obviously the sites that are available, are the current policies appropriate and should they be continued or discontinued, what new policies and programs are needed, what are the community's expressed goals and how have those changed, and of course the crux, how do we meet our RHNA and are we going to have to adopt policies in order to meet it? So that's a brief overview of the contents and the structure of the housing element. I'm just turning to the update process itself. Of course, we are very near the end of 2021 now. We are in the phase of analyzing data, drafting sections of the current housing element. We are digging into the sites inventory, and we hope to have that done next month in draft form. And we hope to have specific sections of the housing element available for public review in January, February, and March of next year. And then our intent is to have a draft of the whole housing element distributed for public review in the middle of next year in March and April. And then we are required to have the board adopt and to submit to the state by late 2022. Although the recommendation from folks who have been monitoring how other regions in the state have proceeded with their housing element is that the earlier we can get it to the state, the better chance we have of achieving certification on time, because the state is backlogged and they are taking significantly longer with housing element review than they have in prior cycles. So we will be shooting for earlier, although technically we don't have to have it submitted till toward the end of the year, but we are trying to back that up as much as we can. And in terms of the specific stages of review, we hope to have the sites inventory itself available for public review late January, early February, and the programs and policies in March or April. And those are really the two parts of the housing element that are most significant. Excuse me. That just jumped ahead in a very dramatic fashion. The two components of the housing element that are most significant for the public to see and for the public to review. And then the entirety of the draft housing element out for public review from the end of April and the beginning of May 2022. And we will circulate it for at least a month for public comment and then review the comment and integrate it into the housing element as we move forward to councils, to the Planning Commission, to the board for adoption. So in terms of outreach and participation, I think we are still in a state, and in fact, not only has nothing changed, I think conditions have worsened to some extent. So we will be in virtual meetings, I think indefinitely, or at least hybrid meetings. But we do intend to come back to the North Forks Community Council for study sessions specifically on those components that we intend to release as drafts in the early part of the year, as well as to the other advisory councils. We have an online survey out now, and we'll be publicizing that pretty broadly in the next few weeks. We are, of course, looking for direct input from stakeholders, from community members. There are a variety of online materials available, and there is an email notification list, and I'll show the website where you can sign up for that notification list. So that is the website here, the county's housing element update, the first link here. And I know I don't believe we're using the chat, so I can't put these in the chat, but the presentation will be available on the council's website. And all this information is also available through this website. We are engaged with other jurisdictions in working on shared elements of our housing element updates. And that's this Let's Talk Housing website, if anyone's interested in seeing how that is going. And then if anyone wants to dig more into the ABAG and the RENA process and how the methodology works and what the numbers are, this final link takes you to that process. The surveys in English and in Spanish are linked here. And again, this information will be up. We have already started to get a pretty significant response from the North Forks community because the door hangers that went out to the community had links to the surveys on there. So they've also been distributed by email more broadly in the county to everyone that's on the mailing list. But the largest number of responses so far have definitely come from North Forks. So that's actually an encouraging sign that people are seeing the hangers, people are going to the survey sites and completing them. And my contact information is here. If anyone wants to contact me directly with comments, with questions, with their interest, or their needs in their issues, their needs about housing, they can contact me at the first email here. And my colleague, Brian Albini, is the Spanish language contact for questions, for comments, for inquiries. And with that, I think that concludes my presentation, and I would turn it back to the chair for any questions from the council, and I believe any questions from the public as well.
Yeah, let's go ahead and start with questions from the council. Do we have any council members who have questions this evening? I'm looking at Councilmember Rodriguez. Ever I see your hand up, why don't you go ahead?
Yes, thank you, Will, for your presentation. Yeah, I have several questions. The first one being, I wonder if San Mateo County has a choice on selecting the areas that can go through rezoning, you know, if there aren't enough sites for development, let's say that there aren't, and that you need to rezone some of the light industrial areas. Is county able to select what areas, or how does that work?
Yes, so yes and no. We are able to, so if we do the sites inventory analysis and we find that we are short of the numbers that the state requires of us, we can choose areas to rezone, but we will have to demonstrate to the state that rezoning those areas is likely to produce enough of the right kinds of housing to meet the need that we're missing. So if we're missing in the lower income categories, in general, we need to rezone to fairly high densities. The way that the state makes an assumption that high density housing tends to be more affordable. And so they will want us, for instance, if in the very low income category, we're short by 200 units, they will want us to rezone some areas to very high densities. And they'll want us to demonstrate that development in those areas is likely to happen at those densities. So we can choose, but we also have to prove, I would say. So it's a bit of a yes and no.
And thank you. And a follow-up question specifically on density. As you know, density is already an issue in North Fair Oaks, and the infrastructure is, I wouldn't call it the best, but so is county considering those issues, you know, already having high density? If I can venture to say, you know, insufficient infrastructure, is county evaluating all those issues when considering this plan?
Yes. So we consider the infrastructure capacity if we were to rezone, and our hope is we do not have to rezone, that we're not mandated to do that. Our hope is the analysis shows we have sufficient sites with what we have now to meet the need. If we don't, then yes, we would look at where are we going to rezone? What is the infrastructure capacity? And if we rezone, if we propose rezonings, the environmental review that's required for that rezoning also has to look at the infrastructure. So we would have to demonstrate that there's sufficient capacity, or we would have to demonstrate that we can improve the capacity enough to support that new development. So that would be part of the analysis, certainly. And I think you make a very good point that in North Fair Oaks, you know, we've done significant rezoning. There may be greater densification. There are projects happening, and we are running up against capacity limits. So that would be taken into consideration at any of the areas we look at. But we are, you know, we would be looking broadly at all the areas of the county to see where it would be appropriate to put new development.
As long as I don't see anybody else raising a hand, maybe I can ask another question. So following that, that line about density, what would be the parking alternatives? You know, parking being another huge issue here in North Fair Oaks.
So I think, you know, we would be allowed to adopt, you know, parking is a challenge in North Fair Oaks and in a lot of other areas as well. And particularly in areas that are not in, you know, don't have the easiest access to transit, which is the case with some of the areas in North Fair Oaks and some other areas throughout the county. We would be allowed to impose, to a certain extent, we can impose the parking restrictions that are deemed appropriate for the level of development that we rezone to. Unfortunately, however, there are some new state laws that require that for any type of development, if they provide enough affordable housing, they get some pretty severe parking reductions. And that is a little bit out of our hands. That's another one of the state laws that has come to, actually several state laws that have come down that say, if a project is willing to dedicate a significant portion of the units as affordable, we are tied, our hands are somewhat tied in how much parking we can require of them. So for market rate housing, we can basically say you have to provide however much parking. Well, there are some state limits on how much we can, but we can certainly say this is what we think is the parking required for this type of development. That's what's required. But there are some ways that developers can get reductions, and those are by utilizing some new state laws. And that's in general, it's not just for the new zoning districts, that's for existing zoning districts as well. That's basically for development of all kinds throughout the county. The state has kind of mandated some pretty dramatic parking reductions.
Vice Chair Prado, I see your hand. Juan Carlos, go ahead, please.
Yeah, my question is regarding the long-term plans. As the needs change in the community, particularly in the last couple of years with COVID, we have seen some shifts in the housing population, some people moving away. How will we adjust, or the plan adjust to those needs or modifications that are, I guess you can say, circumstantial regarding that?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question, because I think we're all uncertain as to how permanent, how deep and how permanent those changes will be. And I think some of it's going to depend on what employers demand, the extent to which I think, in large part, these are the impacts of the pandemic and work from home and a lot of those changes. We are trying to assess those changes, and I think everyone in the region is. We will have the flexibility to some extent to change our policies as we go forward. What happens once you adopt the housing element is one of the requirements is that we report annually on our progress in implementation, and there are opportunities to go back and to adjust our policies as we move forward if it seems that some of them may not be as effective, or there will be other policies that would be more effective to address conditions that have changed. I think that it's a really an area of confusion, and I think a really important one as to how dramatic that shift is going to be and how lasting that shift is going to be. And I think it's just a matter of, we're going to have to assess it over the next few years and see how that goes.
Thank you.
Any other questions from council members? Ever, you have your hand raised, go ahead.
Yeah, I wonder if, so this is only for unincorporated San Mateo County, you said, correct?
Yeah.
So I wonder if the geographic location of North Fair Oaks puts our community at a disadvantage because how centrally located it is, somewhat close to the train, highway, etc. Does this put North Fair Oaks at a disadvantage in terms of being a better suited community than another community that is not as centrally located?
I think from the perspective of the state and ABAG, North Fair Oaks is seen as a community that is appropriate for higher density development. And I think part of what drove the RENA process was that assumption. So yes, I think whether you see that as an advantage or a disadvantage is, a matter of interpretation. But if you are seeing the state as or ABAG as kind of burdening North Fair Oaks, at least in their analysis of where development should go, then yes, I do think those are factors that play into how they went about their analysis.
And as a follow-up question, is county venturing into the possibility of extending public transportation to other areas that are not as densely populated?
That is a good, so I know that Samtrans is going through a service plan update right now, and we do have staff members that are participating in that update. They are an independent interjurisdictional agency that the county, we don't control. But we are participating in that. And we would certainly hope to see greater transit to greater areas, but I'm not sure how that is going to play out.
Yeah, and finally, so I guess if the surrounding cities have the same issue, that has no bearing whatsoever with what the county needs to do. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's essentially, every county has gotten their number and we are stuck with it. and every jurisdiction, every city, every county has gotten their number, and the numbers are not based on each other. We can't trade them across jurisdictions. They really are. I think the way the analysis was done and the way the numbers were come up with took the whole region into account, and kind of the interplay of where jobs and housing are and where people commute and where growth will be. But once those numbers are established, yes, it's just our responsibility, and Redwood City has their responsibility, and Menlo Park has their responsibility, and we are all on the hook for our own numbers, essentially.
Thank you.
I'm going to go ahead and toss one out there while we're on the subject of numbers, Will. And I don't know if it's too early in the process to be able to answer this, but could you give us a ballpark number as to what portion of the 2,800 units that have to be built in the unincorporated areas may wind up in North Fair Oaks as opposed to other unincorporated portions of the county?
It is, unfortunately,
Early.
I couldn't even give you how close we are to the total number at this point.
Okay.
So although we're close, I think by next month we'll have, so I think where we'll be next month is we will have assessed every possible site. And I almost think we are going to need most of them if we want to meet this. I don't know how much of that will be in North Fair Oaks. It won't, the initial assessment will not rely on rezoning in North Fair Oaks whatsoever. It'll be what is currently in North Fair Oaks, what the zoning allows currently, but how much of the share is there, I'm not sure. But considering that we went through multiple phases of rezoning that allowed significantly greater density in some areas of North Fair Oaks, I do think we probably will see that a significant number of what we have available now is going to be in North Fair Oaks and unincorporated Colma and probably the Broadmoor and Devonshire communities. I think those are going to be the largest chunks.
Okay. One other thing I wanted to bring up with regard to parking, because it came up already. I attended a session last night. It was actually a public workshop for the project that's being considered for 3009 to 3017 Middlefield. And I asked the developer, basically, does the project park itself? And he referred to, I think it's AB 385, if that's the legislation you were referring to.
It's one, there's multiple.
There's multiple.
They're relying on what's called the state density bonus law.
Okay.
They are 100% senior housing, I believe, and 100% affordable housing.
They are. Yes, they are.
Yes.
So they get a double bonus there, as it were.
They get a double bonus, and I'm not sure what parking they're required to produce, but it's very minimal.
Okay, and this is the scary part as far as I'm concerned, because it's 85 units, 73 are going to be 1 bedroom, 12 are 2 bedroom, and they're planning on 39 parking spaces. Right
So
along
that's-
Middlefield, close to a
Yeah.
residential area where we already have a big parking problem. So it sounds like our hands are tied, but it's something we need to consider as we go forward,
Yeah.
because, with the improvement to Middlefield Road, parking is going to get worse way before it gets better, if it ever does.
Yeah, I agree with you, and that, I can't predict, but I do think that is the way the state is moving. They're going to impose these mandates on local jurisdictions, and we have very little say over those projects come in. They get to ask for that, and we have to grant it. It's a very interesting scenario, similar to accessory dwelling unit regulations, where there are many circumstances where we're not allowed to impose parking requirements on them as well. It's just a little bit of the way of the world, right? At least, right now with the current legislature and kind of the current policy landscape.
Okay. Are there other questions from other council members? I don't see, Ever, I see your hand up again. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, well, I'm wondering if this is sort of a typical way of proceeding, on a typical 8-year cycle, or if there's anything new to this iteration.
There was a minor change. We were on a 7-year cycle until this term. but the state had extended it by 1 year. And that was to line it up with some other state processes that happen on 8-year cycles, but it's essentially the same. This is the third one I've worked on, I think. The last 2 were 7-year cycles. When I first started at the county was one of the first projects I worked on. And I would say the big change is not the timeline. Although it's been extended slightly, the big change is the level of analysis, the level of demonstration of the feasibility of the site's inventory, the amount of housing we're required to demonstrate we have available space for, and kind of the kind of detail of the restrictions. So they basically, the state has imposed kind of new rules on how we do this. Every time we've come back to do it, there are a set of more stringent rules on how much we have to show and how we prove it. And those are really the biggest changes, I would say.
Yeah, and I wonder if there may be other places, other cities, even in other parts of the world that are sort of doing things differently. This is based on, my worry that, increasing housing in North Oaks may be detrimental to the quality of life, considering that we don't have public spaces for recreation, etc. I wonder if you have any ideas about that.
I think you are making a point that many jurisdictions are grappling with, which is we do have a housing crisis. This is one of the ways that we, are in many ways mandated to deal with it. We're trying to grapple with that as best we can, but at the same time, a community requires not just housing, but a full range of services that are integrated, services and amenities that are integrated. And if you focus on housing alone, you are not creating that kind of livable community. So that is, it's a challenge, and I think it's a challenge that we're all facing. And it's, there are ways, the housing element itself is not a venue for necessarily addressing those broader challenges, but as a county and as a county government, those are things that are within our purview to address to the extent that we can, obviously.
Any other questions from council members?
Mr. Chair, for the record, I do want to mention that for the alternate and the regular youth council members, they are also present now.
I did see them, Suki. Thank you very much for pointing that out.
Sure.
I don't see any hand raised, so I'll ask one more question. And I'm not sure if this is in your wheelhouse or not, Will, but can we expect commercial developers, obviously the biggest increase in our number is in the very low income housing units. Can commercial developers come in and build that sort of housing profitably in San Mateo County? Or do we rely on government? Is there like a government funding assumption that to some extent that'll have to be subsidized if it's going to happen?
For 100% affordable housing, it almost inevitably requires subsidy.
Okay.
The land prices in the Bay Area are too great for a for-profit developer to be able to buy the land and pay the construction costs and get their project to, as we say, pencil, to make the kind of profit off of it that makes it worthwhile for them to do it. So what happens is typically it's nonprofit developers, and they receive subsidies from the county and they receive subsidies from the state. And that's how that kind of development the 2009 to 2017 middle is funded by tax credits from the state. That is a 100% tax credit product. So they, although they actually, I think they are a nonprofit subsidiary of a for-profit corporation, they are receiving significant subsidies from the state and probably from the county as well, but I'm not entirely sure of that.
me see if there's anything. Do we have other questions from other council members?
Can I ask another question?
Please go ahead, Ever.
Considering that the current zoning allows for higher buildings along the Middlefield Road corridor, I'm wondering if there may be a way for county to approach, some of those owners or all of those owners, incentivizing, creating buildings that can have more housing on top and businesses on the bottom. Is that even an alternative?
So I think, I think there's a couple of points. One, the zoning was intended to facilitate that, obviously, and the hope is that if developers and the owners want to do so, they are now allowed to do so. Number two, if the sites inventory will definitely show the potential of those parcels to be reused. And one of the purposes of the sites inventory is for developers to be able to see it and say, okay, these are redevelopable parcels. Maybe we should be interested in those. But a third point is that it will be public. You will see a draft of it. And if you think there are particular ones that the county might try to engage in conversations just to encourage those owners or developers, then we would hope that the council and members of the public would point that out. And what we hopefully will have is a way for you to comment parcel by parcel. We hope to have a mapping tool where you can look at every parcel and you can click on it and you can comment to us and it'll be in the record what your opinion of that parcel being included in the sites inventory is, and whether is it a good idea. Are there conditions that we don't know about this parcel that say it should not be included, it's inappropriate, or it is appropriate and it's a viable parcel and this is one that really should be pursued? And we may be able to. We haven't had a lot of success in the past, I will be honest, with approaching property owners directly and encouraging or getting them interested in development, but it's always a possibility. It hasn't been something that we've done it in a couple of cases and it hasn't worked. It hasn't produced much, but it is certainly not out of the realm of possibility.
Thank you.
I have one more, Will, if there are other hands up. Can we take a look at SB 9 from the standpoint of building assumptions into our housing element that says we believe so many homeowners will take the opportunity to create additional units, that kind of thing?
That is a very good question.
Okay.
We are also trying to figure out with the state what they will accept as assumptions. So we know there will be SB 9 development. And for anyone, I don't know if everyone is familiar with that, but SB 9 is a new state law that says for single family zoned parcels, single family residential parcels in certain areas, and those areas include essentially all of the urbanized Bayside, everything from 280 going east of the unincorporated county. Property owners are allowed to split their parcel in two. They're allowed to build 2 units on a parcel that was formerly single family, and they're allowed to split a parcel in 2 and then build 2 units on each parcel under certain conditions. But it means that potentially a single family, single parcel can become 2 duplex parcels, creating 4 units. So what we need is to figure out, and we are working with the other jurisdictions on this, what methodology will the state accept for our assumptions on that? Because we very much want to be able to rely on that. It will happen. We just, how much can we assume it will happen? And we will incorporate that into the housing element in some way, into the sites inventory, but we have to know what they will let us, what are the boundaries of the assumptions that the state will find realistic. we're doing, and by the way, we're doing the same thing with ADUs. We are going to count ADUs in the sites inventory because we know they're happening. We're going to project forward what we've already been seeing. But again, we have to, and we're in the process of clarifying with the other jurisdictions what the state will allow as a methodology to make how conservative do we have to be with those assumptions as well.
Okay. Are there other questions from council members? Okay, let's open it. Oh, please go ahead, Ever.
Are there any county incentives to build housing? I mean, to allow for example, an owner of a property along Middlefield Road, is there a way to incentivize that property owner to start thinking, okay, maybe I should consider it?
I mean, unless you're building affordable housing, I mean, if you're building large scale multifamily housing, the process is extraordinarily streamlined. So the incentive in terms of permit processing and in some cases permit fees is there, but a direct incentive, a financial incentive, no, we don't have any at this point. So although for affordable housing, our housing department heavily subsidizes and incentivizes the development of affordable housing, but not market rate housing per se.
Okay, additional questions from the council? See, let's turn to the public. Do we have, Suki, do we have questions from the public attendees tonight?
Sure, thank you, Mr. Chair. So members of the public, if you wish to comment on item number 3, which was the presentation on housing by Will Gibson, please do raise your hand now in Zoom. I do see 2 hands raised. First, I'll call on Gabriela Valencia, followed by Rafael A. Gabriela, I'm going to give you the permission to talk, and you'll have 2 minutes. Ms. Valencia, can you hear me? Oh, you're very faint. No, I cannot hear you. Let me come back to you. Maybe you can fix your audio. So we'll come back to you. Rafael, I'm going to give you the permission to talk, and you'll have 2 minutes. Please proceed.
Hello, Council. I'm speaking on as a volunteer and also community member. As far as the plan, I would like to, oh, I'm echoing. Okay. Thank you. While this is a great start to something that has already been happening, I would love for the planning team to consider looking at the Plan Bay Area 2050 model, being that the state has allocated a certain plan, but we need to consider also the job creation and the status quo demographic trends that tend to change in the Bay Area, let alone with the implications that COVID has had to our communities of color. So yeah, it would just generate a thought to spend some time looking at planbayarea2050.org as a baseline to support the creation of a more ethical and equitable approach on doing this work with the community, being that it's a model that already exists and one that has been proposed to different board of supervisors. Thank you so much, and thanks for the work you're doing.
Thank you, Rafael. Okay, I'll go back to Gabriela Valencia. Gabriela, I'm going to give you the permission to talk. Hopefully the audio has been resolved, the issue. So please proceed. I still can't hear you. Sorry, Valencia. If you wanted to email your written comment, and then I can provide that to the board members. The email is communityaffairs@smcgov.org. Sorry about that. Chair, I don't see any other hands raised. Back to you.
Okay, thank you, Suki. Sorry. Oh, well, as I understand, you had some prompting topics, some other housing issues and needs you were looking for input on?
Yeah, I did, although I think people have spoken to them to a certain extent, but I can just show really quickly what we were gonna ask of people as just some thematic issues. So we thought it would be nice to hear people, how is housing affecting you personally? What are your housing impacts, housing issues and needs? What are your perceptions beyond your own issues and needs of what the community's issues are more broadly? And those may be the same or may be different. And then what, including and beyond the discussion we've just had, what do you think the county should be focusing on? So if anyone would like to speak to those specifically, those were just prompts. Obviously, we want people to speak from their experience and any kind of comment that they see fit to give. But if this prompts anything, we would certainly love to take input on that.
Any thoughts from council members on these topics, questions? Let's see. Councilmember Rodriguez, go ahead.
Yeah, a couple of these issues I've already mentioned, having higher density usually can bring, I guess, diminished quality of life. And, to mention some examples, I've seen some comments on Nextdoor going on about, the tensions and the friction that the lack of parking can create, where a lady got her tires slashed for parking, outside of somebody that had some orange cones. And apparently, maybe whoever did it didn't know that that person lived, right around the corner. So many times, that's obviously created because the lack of parking and some people not knowing the rules or not having, basic respect. Who knows? But it is a good example of some of the tensions that are created with higher density, where you just got to find parking for your vehicle. And, going from there also to not having public spaces for the public to go, to a park or recreation, some of those issues are, things that come up to when we have limited space in higher density.
Yes.
Any other comments from council members on these topics? Okay, do we have any public comment on these questions, these topics?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members of the public, I believe you can see the screen. So if you wish to comment on any of these three topics, please do click the raise hand feature in Zoom. Okay, I do see one hand raised. Raphael, I'm going to give you 2 minutes to speak, and you can start speaking now.
Thank you. As far as my personal housing issues and needs as an educator in the community, it's just really sad to see continued families move out of the area based on the medical, housing, and food insecurity that exists in our community. Per the most recent report, as stated in our COVID-19 needs assessment from the Stanford's Gardner Center, we are seeing that there is a rise in homelessness as well. So as far as answering the question on county to be focusing on, I think they are doing this, but it's really looking at it at a futuristic lens as opposed to a 7 to 10 year, maybe looking more into like a 20 to 25 spectrum year set. Looking at models like the Harlem Children's Zone, similar to what the St. Francis is doing, and seeing how we could leverage CBO community-based organizations to do that work in collaboration with county, like they've been doing, but to more of a hyper mode, so that we're able to preserve and take care of the folks that are really supporting the services that we need for us to flow as an economy. Thank you.
Thank you for your input, Raphael. Do we have other public comment?
I'll do the last call for folks to raise their hand if they wish to comment on these 3 topics. Mr. Chair, I don't see any other hands raised. Back to you.
Okay, thank you very much, Suki. I think, Will, in terms of next steps, the council is going to be very interested to see the sites inventory when it's ready. And you're thinking that'll be done end of January. But if we were to put you on an agenda, either perhaps for a study session in March, would that give you an opportunity to have a presentation ready? We could look at, particularly, I'm thinking neighborhood by neighborhood to really put a critical eye to what's been developed. I think some of the concerns you've heard tonight are going to be a little more obvious and manifest when we do see, well, here's what we've identified, and I think a lot of us have a handle on the issues that some of these things are going to create. So perhaps a study session in March would be the way to go.
I think that would give us enough. I mean, we certainly hope to have a draft sites inventory available significantly before that. So I think March is a safe time to assume. And again, I just want to emphasize, we are assessing every site. That does not mean we are going to cause it to be developed. We'll be relying on what's allowed now. And not proposing at this point. The sites inventory proposes no changes to zoning, no changes to what's allowed, simply an assessment of what's there now. But I do think it's a very helpful exercise to go kind of neighborhood by neighborhood and parcel by parcel even, and look at them with the critical eye of the council who has more on the ground knowledge and the community who has more on the ground knowledge of those sites.
Yeah, what I'd like to be able to do in March is kind of have a rough idea of how many of those new units, if it's 1,600, 1,700 are going to be in North Fair Oaks. And here's kind of the first draft of how we're going to go about doing that. So that would be terrific. And to your point, I think the council and hopefully the public will have a lot of input on that.
Absolutely.
If there are no other comments, I think that'll wrap us up for this evening. Okay. I see no hands raised. So thank you very much for your presentation tonight, Will. I think we're all getting smarter in this as we go along. And I think some of the questions that we asked tonight show more of an understanding of the process and the input that we can provide to the housing element. So thank you for your presentation. Thanks to the members of the public who attended and participated. Raphael, thank you for your questions tonight. As always, thanks to county staff for helping us out with these meetings. Justin, Suki, Anna, Emma, Tim, for your support. And then,
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Sorry, I do see one hand raised from the public. Did you want to see if maybe the audio is working now?
Please, yeah, if we can have Gabriella, that would be terrific.
Sure. This is Gabriela Valencia. I'm giving you the permission to talk. Please proceed. Sorry, still no.
Oh, she's still faint. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Go ahead and repeat that address for her, Suki, so she can send written comments.
Sure. Written comments can be sent to communityaffairs@smcgov.org.
Thank you very much for that.
Sure.
Our next session is going to be a study session on January 20th. That'll be the annual planning session for the North Fair Oaks Community Council. With that, I'd like to wish everybody a happy and healthy holiday season, and we stand adjourned. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you all. The time is
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, happy holidays.
Happy holidays, everyone.
Bye. Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.